The arrival. In the far reaches of the countryside, where maps faded into blank spaces and the roads grew narrow enough to be mistaken for forgotten trails, there lay whispers of a place that had been swallowed by time itself, a village once known as Ashwood Hollow. Few dared to speak its name aloud, for the legend carried with it a darkness older than memory and heavier than silence, and yet, for those consumed by curiosity or desperation, the path always revealed itself. Ethan Cole had never believed in such stories. He was a journalist by profession, the kind who hunted for truth in places others dismissed as fantasy. But when an anonymous letter arrived at his apartment in the city, yellowed paper, ink smudged yet deliberate, with nothing written but the words, "If you want to unveil the legend, go to Ashwood Hollow before the last moon of winter," something inside him stirred. He had received plenty of cryptic tips in his career, but this one felt different, as if the words themselves carried weight, urging him not to ignore them. The days that followed grew stranger. His phone rang at odd hours only to return silence, his doorbell rang but no one stood outside, and sometimes, in the reflection of his apartment window, he swore he saw the faint outline of trees swaying where only concrete towers should have been. He told himself it was fatigue, the mind playing tricks, yet the letter never left his pocket, as though it had embedded itself into his destiny. When he finally set out, the winter air was sharp, the sky an endless gray, and the road stretched longer than it should have, twisting into unfamiliar territories. His GPS lost signal miles back, and the few locals he asked about Ashwood Hollow only shifted uneasily, muttering, "Best not to go there." But Ethan was stubborn, and perhaps foolish, for legends were, to him, the lifeblood of stories worth telling. The deeper he drove, the quieter the world became. Birdsong vanished, the wind grew still, and even the crunch of gravel beneath his tires seemed muted. By dusk, when the sun bled crimson across the horizon, he saw it, a wooden archway rotting with age, its carvings faded, yet still legible enough to spell out, "Welcome to Ashwood Hollow." Beyond it, a narrow cobblestone road led into shadowed woods where the trees leaned unnaturally close, branches twisting like skeletal fingers. He parked his car hesitantly, feeling the suffocating stillness, and stepped beyond the archway. The moment he crossed, a chill ran through him, as though unseen eyes had noticed his presence. The village revealed itself slowly, like a painting brushed with gloom. Houses leaned inward, their roofs sagging, their windows shattered, yet there was no dust, no decay that time should have brought. It was as though the place had been abandoned in a single night, frozen in the moment of departure. A church bell tower loomed at the center, though its bell was cracked, the cross bent sideways. The streets were lined with old lantern posts that flickered faintly though no flame burned within. Ethan, gripping his recorder and camera, whispered notes into the air, his voice sounding too loud in the silence. He tried to shake off the growing unease by framing his work: abandoned village, possible cult history, must investigate church records. But as he spoke, a faint sound reached his ears: footsteps. He turned sharply, but the road behind him was empty. The houses stared back with hollow windows like eyes, and the woods behind the archway had grown darker, as though sealing off escape. He quickened his pace, moving toward the church, the sound of footsteps continuing, sometimes behind, sometimes beside him, though never visible. When he pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the church, the hinges groaned, echoing through the hollow chamber. Inside, the pews were intact yet coated with a faint sheen, not of dust, but of something resembling ash. The altar was draped in black cloth, and behind it, etched into the stone wall, was a symbol, a circle intersected by jagged lines, with an eye at the center. Ethan froze, recognizing the symbol from obscure folklore he had studied. The Eye of Hollow, said to belong to a sect that believed the world was not watched over by God but by something beneath, something that fed on silence and despair. His recorder clicked as he whispered the details, but his voice faltered when he noticed something carved into the pews: names, hundreds of them, etched in frantic strokes, as if the villagers themselves had inscribed their existence before vanishing. Some names were crossed out violently, gouged so deep the wood splintered. He leaned closer, running his fingers over the names, when suddenly the air shifted. The temperature plummeted, his breath turned visible, and the sound of a bell rang out, not from above, but from within the church walls themselves, muffled and distorted. Ethan staggered back, his recorder slipping from his hand, and in that moment, he saw movement. In the far corner, near the shadows where the candlelight didn't reach, something stirred. It was not a person, not fully. A figure crouched unnaturally, limbs too long, face obscured by a veil of black hair, rocking back and forth. He blinked, and it was gone. The silence returned, but the pews no longer looked the same. The names had changed. His own name now appeared, carved freshly into the wood, the grooves still raw. Ethan stumbled backward, terror clawing at his chest, and fled the church. Outside, the village looked different, altered under the pale light of the moon. Where before the houses had stood abandoned, now faint candlelight flickered within, shadows moving against the windows as though the villages had returned. The air filled with whispers, layered voices chanting words he couldn't understand. His instinct screamed to run, yet his curiosity anchored him. He pulled out his camera, filming the eerie sight, narrating in a hushed voice. But then, the whispers coalesced into a single sentence, repeated again and again, growing louder until it thundered in his head, "You should not have come." The ground beneath him trembled. Cracks spread across the cobblestones, and from them seeped a black, tar-like substance that pulsed as though alive. Ethan stumbled back, his foot nearly sinking into the sludge, and as he raised his eyes, he saw them. Figures emerging from the houses, their movements stiff, their faces pale, eyes hollow and gleaming faintly with an unnatural light. They moved toward him slowly, whispering his name. He turned to run toward the archway, but when he looked, it was gone. In its place stretched endless woods, trees crowding so densely no path could be seen. His lungs burned as he sprinted, yet the village twisted around him, streets repeating, leading him back to the church no matter which direction he took. Panting, he collapsed near the fountain at the center square. The water inside was black, reflecting not his face but a distorted version, eyes gouged out, mouth sewn shut. He stumbled away, gagging, when he noticed something near the fountain's edge, a diary, its leather cover damp but intact. Desperate for answers, he opened it. The first page was dated centuries ago, written by a villager named Alara. "The night of the hollow draws near. We were warned not to look into its eye, but the elders insist the ritual must continue. If we disobey, it will take us one by one." Page after page told of fear, of rituals held to appease something that lived beneath the village, something they called the Watcher in the Ashes. The last entry chilled him. "The bell tolls tonight. If you hear it, it is already too late." A sudden vibration in his pocket startled him, his phone. Against all odds, it had signal. A single notification blinked on the screen, one new message. His hands shook as he opened it. The message was a photo. His photo, taken just now, from behind him, as he sat reading the diary. Slowly, he turned. The Watcher in the Ashes. Ethan froze, the phone trembling in his hand, the glow of the screen illuminating the fear etched across his face. The photograph stared back at him, unmistakably recent. The angle was over his shoulder, the diary still open in his lap, his head tilted in concentration. But what unsettled him most wasn't that someone had taken the picture. It was what stood behind him in the image. A figure, impossibly tall, thin as bone, draped in what looked like tattered ash-colored robes. Its head bent low as if studying him, but where a face should have been, there was only a black void, like smoke trapped in human shape. Ethan whipped around, but the square behind him was empty, the houses silent, the shadows long. His pulse hammered as he shoved the phone into his jacket, clutching the diary like a lifeline. The air around him pressed heavier now, the silence punctuated by faint clicks, like fingernails tapping stone. He stood, forcing his unsteady legs toward the nearest house where candlelight still flickered. Maybe, he thought, there was someone, anyone, alive to explain this nightmare. He pushed the door open, the wood creaking against his weight, and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, iron and smoke. The house looked lived in, though covered in a thin veil of grey ash. A meal lay set on the table, bread hardened into stone, soup blackened to sludge, yet the bowls were pristine, as if untouched. His recorder, miraculously unbroken, hissed faint static from his pocket as though struggling to capture the room itself. He whispered into it, Day 1, Ashwood Hollow. Possible signs of mass disappearance. Houses appear frozen in time. Diary suggests ritual sacrifice. His words faltered. From the far corner of the room, something shifted. A chair scraped across the floor. Slowly, he raised his flashlight, its beam slicing the darkness. A woman sat in the chair, back to him, long black hair cascading down her shoulders. She didn't move, not even to breathe. Relief and dread collided in Ethan's chest as he whispered, Hello. Mom, are you from this village? No response. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning underfoot. When he reached out and touched her shoulder, the body collapsed into a heap of ash, scattering across the floor in a silent cloud. His scream tore through the silence before he clamped a hand over his mouth. The whispering voices outside grew louder, chanting now, rhythmic and deliberate. They were closer. Ethan bolted from the house, stumbling back into the square. The diary slipped from his grip but landed open, pages fluttering as though caught in a wind only it could feel. He bent to grab it when he noticed new words scrawling themselves across the paper, written in fresh ink by no visible hand, Run. His chest tightened. He obeyed. He fled deeper into the village, the twisting streets disorienting, houses repeating in impossible patterns. Each turn brought him back to the fountain or the church, as if the village itself were alive, rearranging around him. Exhaustion burned in his muscles, but then he saw it, a building larger than the rest, its windows stained black, its door sealed with rusted chains. The words carved into the door read, Do not enter. Keep the watcher bound, which of course only made Ethan more determined to enter. He searched frantically until he found a rock, smashing it against the lock until it broke with a metallic snap. The door swung open, exhaling a rush of air so cold it burned. Inside was a hall of records, shelves stretching upward into shadows, stacked with journals, scrolls, and boxes. Lanterns lit themselves as he entered, their flames blue, casting the room in a haunting glow. He pulled a journal from the nearest shelf, the handwriting frantic, We failed the last offering. The watcher stirs. Already the wells bleed black. Already the children speak with voices not their own. We have no choice but to seal it below. Another entry read, It knows our names. It carves them into wood and stone. To be named is to be claimed. Ethan's stomach dropped as he remembered the pew in the church, the sight of his own name freshly inscribed. As he read, a sound rose from beneath the floor. A slow, deliberate knocking, like something trapped below. He knelt, brushing aside ash to reveal a trapdoor bound by iron sigils. The knocking grew louder, echoing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Against his better judgment, Ethan touched the iron latch. It was warm, as if heat pulsed from beneath. The diary pages in his other hand fluttered violently, stopping at a final line, To open is to offer. Before he could decide, a crash upstairs startled him. He spun, light flickering wildly, and saw shadows dart across the hall above. Voices began chanting again, but this time they were not outside, they were here, surrounding him. Panic surged, and he slammed the trapdoor shut, retreating from the shelves. The chanting grew louder, overlapping whispers that clawed at his sanity, speaking in a language his ears shouldn't understand but somehow did. The eye is open. The name is written. The hollow is his. Suddenly, lanterns burst, plunging the hall into darkness. Only the faint glow of his flashlight remained, trembling in his grip. He stumbled backward, bumping into a shelf, when hands, cold, skeletal, gripped his shoulders from behind. He spun, shining the light, but no one was there. Still, the pressure lingered, invisible fingers sinking into his skin. He screamed and ran, tripping over fallen books, until he burst back outside into the night air. The square was no longer empty. Dozens of figures now stood, circling the fountain. Their bodies were pale, crumbling like ash statues, their hollow eyes glowing faintly with ember-like light. They turned their heads in unison as he staggered out, their lips moving together to form one voice, Ethan Cole. You were written. His knees buckled. He clutched the diary to his chest as if it could shield him. And then the bell tolled. Deep, resonant, vibrating through the ground, shaking the very air. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside his head, rattling his bones. The villagers collapsed into heaps of ash, scattered by the wind. Silence followed, deafening in its weight. Ethan stumbled away from the square, gasping, until he found himself at the edge of the village where the woods loomed again. For a fleeting moment, he saw his car parked just beyond the trees, headlights faintly glowing as though waiting for him. Hope surged, and he sprinted toward it. Branches tore at his clothes, shadows darted in his periphery, but he didn't stop. He burst into the clearing where the car stood, yanked the door open, and collapsed inside. The keys were still in the ignition. He twisted them, the engine roared, and relief washed over him. He drove without looking back, the road winding endlessly, but at least it was a road, at least it led away. Hours seemed to pass, dawn painting the horizon. His shoulders eased as the village disappeared behind him. He laughed shakily, whispering to himself, "It's over, I got out," but then his phone buzzed again. With trembling hands, he lifted it. Another message. Just 3 words, "Look behind you." Slowly, heart hammering, he adjusted the rearview mirror. His breath caught in his throat. The back seat was no longer empty. The name that binds. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, his throat dry as sand. The reflection in the rearview mirror refused to change, no matter how many times he blinked or shook his head. There, in the back seat of his car, sat the figure he had seen in the photograph. Its body was tall and thin, joints bent at wrong angles, draped in ashen robes that seemed to breathe on their own. Its head was bowed, no face visible, just that void of smoke and shadow where features should have been. He dared not turn around physically. Some primal instinct screamed that acknowledging it fully would be a mistake. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the road ahead, whispering, "It isn't real. It isn't real," yet the air inside the car grew colder with every mile, frost crawling across the windshield from the inside, the engine groaning as though it labored under impossible weight. The figure shifted. Slowly, impossibly, its head tilted upward. In the mirror, Ethan saw the void where its eyes should be, and in that void, something moved, like dozens of hands reaching out from a pit of darkness. The radio crackled to life, though he hadn't touched it. A voice whispered through static, low and distorted, yet unmistakably his own voice. "You are written. You are bound. You are his." Ethan slammed the radio off, but the words continued, vibrating in the air of the car. His pulse roared in his ears as the road stretched endlessly, never changing. He glanced at the odometer. The miles ticked upward, yet the scenery outside remained the same stretch of forest, the same pale dawn that never brightened. His chest constricted with dread as the realization sank in, he wasn't leaving. The village wasn't behind him. It was around him, everywhere. Panicked, he swerved the car off the road, crashing through underbrush until the vehicle screeched to a halt against a tree. Breath ragged, he fumbled with the door and tumbled out into the dirt. The woods loomed, silent, pressing in. Behind him, the car sat askew, steam rising from the crumpled hood. The back seat was empty now. He swallowed hard, backing away. The diary, still clutched in his hand, pulsed with unnatural heat. He flipped it open, desperate for answers. The fresh ink continued to appear as though the book wrote itself in real time. "You cannot flee. The hollow walks with you now. To escape, you must sever the name. Sever the name." The words echoed in his mind. He remembered the carvings in the church pews, the frantic gouges in the wood, names violently struck through. The villagers had tried to erase themselves, to unwrite their existence, as though names themselves were chains. But how could he sever his name? He shouted into the empty forest, "What does that mean?" The only reply was the wind carrying faint whispers, "Ethan, Ethan, Ethan." His own name, repeated over and over, coming from no direction and every direction at once. He stumbled forward, deeper into the woods, each step heavier than the last, until he emerged into a clearing. At its center stood a stone monolith, blackened with age, covered in thousands of names carved so small they overlapped like scales. He approached, his hand trembling as he traced the letters. At the top, one name glowed faintly, etched freshly, Ethan Cole. Below it, countless other names had been violently scratched out, some reduced to illegible scars. The monolith pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The diary in his hand turned another page on its own, ink searing across the parchment. "To sever, you must give another. The watcher must always have a name." Ethan's stomach lurched. The meaning was clear. He couldn't simply erase himself, he had to offer someone else in his place. His mind raced with possibilities, but the morality of it crushed him. Could he really condemn another person, some innocent stranger, to whatever fate the villages had suffered? He staggered back from the monolith, shaking his head. "No, I can't." His words rang hollow in the clearing. The ground trembled. Shadows thickened between the trees, coalescing into figures, the ash-faced villagers, hollow-eyed, emerging once more. Their voices joined, whispering in unison, "Choose. Choose, or be taken." Their skeletal hands reached toward him, fingers twitching hungrily. Ethan stumbled, clutching the diary tighter, his mind screaming for a solution. He turned and ran, the villagers following, their movements jerky yet relentless, closing the distance with unnatural speed. Branches whipped his face, roots snagged his feet, until he fell hard onto the frozen ground. He rolled over just in time to see the first villager lunge at him. Instinct took over. He hurled the diary at the figure. The book struck its chest and burst into flames, ash erupting in a blinding flash. The villager screamed, dissolving into dust, while the others recoiled, hissing. Ethan seized the burning diary, unhurt by the flames that should have scorched him, and realized, it wasn't just a record. It was a weapon. The ink that wrote itself wasn't mere writing, it was binding. He staggered to his feet, clutching the flaming book, and shouted into the night, "If you want a name, take this one, the Watcher." He scrawled the words into the diary with the charred edge of a branch, carving the title "The Watcher" onto the page. The flames roared, the ground split, and a scream unlike anything human erupted from the monolith in the distance. The villagers collapsed, writhing, their forms cracking apart like porcelain. For a moment, Ethan thought it had worked, that he had tricked the entity into claiming itself. But then the voice came, deeper than thunder, shaking the marrow of his bones. "I am not a name. I am hunger. You are mine." The flames of the diary snuffed out. The clearing fell silent, suffocating. Ethan's vision blurred, his body growing heavy. He collapsed to his knees, the diary slipping from his grasp. His name still glowed on the monolith, brighter than before, burning into the stone. When his eyes fluttered open, he was no longer in the forest. He was back in the village square, the fountain bubbling with black water, the church bell tolling endlessly. Around him stood the villagers, whole now, their eyes watching him with pity more than malice. One of them stepped forward, a woman with long dark hair, the same one whose body had collapsed into ash in the house. But now she looked alive, solid. She spoke softly, her voice both kind and broken, "You should not have come. Once written, none of us ever left." Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered, "What is it? What is the Watcher?" The woman's eyes flicked upward to the bell tower. "It is silence given form. It is the void that watches all who have forgotten. We bound it here with our names, but we could not unwrite ourselves. So we remain, neither alive nor gone. She reached out, brushing his arm gently. You carry its mark now. Your story is its story. And unless another takes your place, her words trailed, the implication heavy. Ethan shook his head violently. No, I won't damn anyone else. The villagers only watched silently, their pity deeper now. The bell tolled again, and with each strike, Ethan felt his body weaken, as though each sound pulled at his very soul. His name on the monolith burned brighter still, the letters bleeding. He collapsed, the world spinning, darkness closing in. His last sight before consciousness slipped was the towering shadow of the bell tower splitting open, something immense and shapeless moving within, an eye of ash and fire staring directly at him. The last toll. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, the tolling of the bell resonating not just in his ears but in his bones, rattling the very structure of his soul. His body felt heavy, as if chains dragged him beneath unseen waters. When he finally forced his eyes open, he was no longer on the ground. He stood inside the church, though the place was changed beyond recognition. The walls bled ash, the pews wreathed like living things, and the altar had split open into a gaping wound in the stone floor. From that wound, black smoke spilled upward, forming tendrils that coiled and uncoiled like serpents. At the center of it all, a vast eye stared, lidless, burning with ash and fire, the Watcher revealed in its truest form. The villagers surrounded him, but now they were clearer, less like phantoms and more like people. Their faces bore centuries of despair, their movements sluggish as though burdened by invisible chains. The woman with dark hair stepped forward again, her expression unreadable. "It claims you," she whispered. "It claims all who come. None who are written leave without giving another." Her words seemed to echo, as though spoken by every villager at once. Ethan staggered backward, his voice hoarse. "There has to be another way. There has to be a way to break it." The Watcher's eye pulsed, and the bell tolled again, louder than ever. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, visions flooding his mind, visions of the villagers centuries ago, standing in this same church, performing rituals in desperation. They had sacrificed livestock, crops, even strangers who wandered into their land, all to feed the hunger of the Watcher. And yet it was never enough. It demanded more. It demanded names. Each name etched into the pews, into the monolith, became a tether. Each villager was bound until death, and even beyond. The visions shifted. Ethan saw himself sitting at his desk in the city, the anonymous letter lying before him. Only now, in the vision, he saw the hand that wrote it, long, pale fingers, nails blackened, moving with deliberate precision. The letter hadn't come from a person. It had come from the Watcher itself, luring him here, ensuring a new name would be bound. His chest tightened with rage and terror. The woman's voice cut through the visions. "You cannot fight it. You cannot break it. You can only choose." Her eyes shimmered with something almost human, regret. Ethan clenched his fists. "If I give another name, they'll suffer like you. They'll be trapped forever." The villagers bowed their heads in unison, their silence answer enough. The Watcher's voice filled the chamber, vast and hollow, vibrating every stone. "Choose, or be chosen. The name must be given. The hollow must be fed." The diary reappeared in his hands, its pages flipping violently, stopping at a blank sheet. The ink bled upward, waiting for a name to be written. His hand shook as the pen formed from the smoke itself, pressing into his palm. Ethan stared at the empty page, the weight of damnation pressing on him. His mind raced, colleagues in the city, strangers he'd met in his travels, even his estranged family. All he needed to do was write one name, and he would walk free. He raised the pen. His hand hovered, but then he remembered the villagers' faces, their centuries of torment, the cycle repeating endlessly. If he chose another, the Watcher would remain, feeding, growing. Nothing would ever change. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan pressed the pen to the page. Instead of another's name, he wrote his own. Ethan Cole. The ink seared into the parchment, glowing white hot. The watcher's eye flared in fury, the bell tolling so violently the tower above cracked, stone raining down. The villagers gasped, their forms trembling as though chains shattered around them. The woman's eyes widened. You gave yourself. Ethan staggered, his body weakening as the letters of his name burned into his skin, branding him. The watcher roared, a sound like an endless void collapsing in on itself. Tendrils of smoke lashed around him, wrapping his arms, his chest, his throat. His vision dimmed, yet in that moment, he felt something strange, peace. If his sacrifice ended the cycle, if his choice gave the villagers release, then it was worth it. The woman's voice rose above the chaos. The name accepts itself, the hollow cannot bind its own will. The villagers began to dissolve, their forms scattering like ash carried by the wind, but their expressions were serene, free at last. The church trembled violently, the altar cracking wide open, the watcher thrashing within its pit of smoke and fire. Ethan's body lifted into the air, suspended above the chasm, his name burning brighter than the flames below. The watcher's voice bellowed in rage, "You cannot sever hunger. You cannot silence the hollow." With the last of his strength, Ethan shouted into the void, "Then you'll feed on me, and only me." The diary in his hand burst into white flame, consuming itself and the page with his name. The fire spread, climbing the tendrils, searing the watcher's form. The eye split, shattering into 1,000 fragments of ash and ember. The bell tolled one final time, and then silence fell. The smoke cleared. The church was gone. The village was gone. Ethan found himself standing in an open field under a dawn sky, the air crisp, alive. Birds sang, the wind moved freely. The land was whole again, the curse lifted. But Ethan was no longer the same. His reflection in a puddle nearby showed no face, only shadow. His voice echoed hollow when he whispered, "It worked." He had given himself to bind the watcher, but in doing so, he had become its vessel. He wandered back toward the road, though he no longer needed a path. The car was gone, the archway gone. All that remained was the world beyond, unaware of the nightmare buried in Ashwood Hollow. For now, the watcher was contained within him. And as he walked into the rising sun, a final thought echoed in his mind, carried on a voice that was his and not his: "The hunger waits. And one day, it will be unveiled again."